Montana dawn cut to the bone when I heard a thin cry behind the gas station dumpster. I carried home a gold-eyed stray to fill the silence my wife left, until the vet said, "Sir, that's a bobcat." Too late. He bumped on the TV, stole my bacon, and slipped into my life. From that moment, the quiet cabin became a comedy stage, and in the blizzard to come, I learned the rescued soul was mine. It was one of those mornings when the mountains in Montana seemed to breathe cold air straight into your bones. The kind of morning where you could see your own breath hanging in the air like a ghost that didn't want to leave. I was sipping my first cup of coffee, the only sound in my cabin being the old wood stove cracking now and then. That's when I heard it, soft, weak, almost like a cry that didn't know if it wanted help or not. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks again, but it came back. A faint trembling sound, like something small was fighting the cold behind my house. I pulled on my boots, grabbed the old flashlight that hadn't worked right since 2008, and stepped into the snow. The path behind my cabin led to an old gas station dumpster, half buried in snow. That's where I saw him, a tiny creature, wet, trembling, with eyes too sharp for a regular cat. "Hey there, little fella," I muttered, bending down. He hissed, more like a warning than a threat. His fur was spotted, not striped, and his paws looked big. Too big for a kitten. He looked up at me like he was deciding whether I was food or salvation. I didn't think twice. I took off my jacket and wrapped him up. He was so light I could feel every bone under that damp fur. I brought him inside, set him by the stove, and grabbed a towel. He didn't move for a while, just stared, golden eyes reflecting the firelight like two tiny suns. I poured a little warm milk into a bowl. He sniffed it, sneezed, and then started lapping. That sound, it filled the cabin with something I hadn't felt in years. I'd been alone for a long time. My wife, Mary, passed 3 winters ago. The cabin had gone quiet after that. Too quiet. So when that little creature let out a funny hiccup after drinking, I laughed for the first time in months. When the sun rose, I drove down to town with him in an old laundry basket. Folks at the diner laughed when they saw me carrying what they thought was a funny-looking cat. Old Jim, who runs the gas station, said, "George, you rescuing raccoons now?" I didn't answer, just smiled. The vet clinic sat on the edge of town, next to a hardware store that still sold nails by the pound. I walked in, the bell over the door jingling. "Morning, George," said Linda, the town vet, a woman with more patience than anyone I've ever met. "What have you got there?" "A stray," I said, setting the basket down. "Found him near the station. Poor guy's half frozen." Linda lifted the towel and blinked. "George, that's not a stray cat." I frowned. "Looks like one to me." She smiled that tired smile people give when they're trying not to laugh. "No, that's a bobcat cub." I stared at her, half expecting her to be joking. "You mean wild? Like out of the woods wild?" "Exactly that," she said, gently checking its paws. "Male, maybe 4 months old. He shouldn't even be near people." "Well," I said, scratching my beard, "he is now." Linda sighed. "You can't keep him, George. Bobcats aren't pets. They belong out there." She nodded toward the snowy mountains. I looked down at the cub. He blinked, yawned, and then bit the corner of my glove. "He seems to disagree," I said. She crossed her arms. "You've fought fires your whole life, but this might be your toughest rescue." I chuckled. "Linda, I've been alone too long to argue with something that small. I'll keep him just till he's strong enough to make it." She gave me that look that said she'd already lost the argument. At least let me check him for parasites. When I brought him home, I gave him a name. Milo, I said out loud, trying it on. He twitched an ear as if accepting the offer. The name felt right. That night, Milo refused to sleep in the box I'd fixed with blankets. Instead, he climbed onto my recliner, pushed the remote off the armrest, and curled up right on the button that turns the TV on. The screen flickered to life, a weather forecast mumbling about another snowstorm. Milo didn't flinch. He stretched out like a king on a throne, tail flicking lazily. "Well," I said, pouring another coffee, "guess you own the place now." For the next few days, the little rascal turned my quiet home into something between a circus and a crime scene. He'd hide under the table and leap out when I walked by, scatter my mail across the floor, and attack my slippers like they were mortal enemies. Every time I said no, he'd stop for 2 seconds, just enough to make me believe he understood, then do the same thing again. I called Linda to ask if bobcats could be funny. She laughed so hard she nearly dropped the phone. "George, they're clever and trouble. You sure you're up for that?" I looked around my cabin, now half destroyed and somehow more alive than it had been in years. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think I am." When I hung up, Milo was sitting on the kitchen counter, chewing on a wooden spoon like it was a toy. He stopped, looked straight at me, and, swear to God, let out a sound that was halfway between a chirp and a laugh. That sound echoed through the cabin, and I felt something shift inside me. I'd gone looking for quiet company. What I got instead was chaos wrapped in fur and attitude. Outside, snow kept falling, thick, heavy, endless. Inside, for the first time since Mary was gone, there was noise, life, movement, and the strange feeling that maybe, just maybe, God hadn't sent me a pet. He'd sent me a reason to laugh again. That night I sat by the stove, the glow flickering across the log walls. Milo snored softly beside my chair, tail twitching with dreams I'd never know. I leaned back, whispering to no one in particular. Guess I didn't just get a bobcat. I got a comedian. And for the first time in years, the mountains outside didn't feel so lonely. If there's one thing I learned after a week with Milo, it's this. A bobcat doesn't ask for permission. He takes over. My quiet cabin, once a place where the only sound was the tick of an old clock, had turned into something between a stand-up show and a demolition derby. I used to wake up to birds outside. Now I woke up to the sound of Milo knocking over coffee mugs and chasing shadows that didn't exist. The first time he climbed the refrigerator, I was making oatmeal. I turned around, and there he was, perched on top like he'd just conquered Mount Everest. He gave me that smug little look and swiped the cereal box right off the edge. Oats everywhere. "You proud of yourself?" I asked. He blinked, yawned, and then jumped straight onto my shoulder like it was a tree branch. My breakfast hit the floor, and so did my dignity. That became his morning routine. Every day he invented new ways to keep me guessing. Once he figured out the kitchen drawers, he pulled out my silverware one piece at a time, like a magician revealing his tricks. Another day, he somehow managed to drag a loaf of bread across the counter, chew through the plastic, and fall asleep right on top of it. I didn't know whether to laugh or start applying for home insurance. When Linda stopped by to check on his health, she couldn't believe her eyes. Milo was standing on the back of my recliner, tail swishing like a metronome, staring at her. She reached out her hand carefully. "Hey, handsome boy." Before she could finish, Milo leapt straight onto her shoulder, scaring her half to death. She froze, wide-eyed. Then he rubbed his cheek against hers like an affectionate house cat. Linda laughed nervously, "George, you don't have a pet. You have a fuzzy natural disaster." "I know," I said, "but he makes me laugh more than cable TV." Milo meowed, or maybe it was a growl, like he knew we were talking about him. That evening, I tried to watch the local news. They were talking about rising gas prices and property taxes. But every time I turned the volume up, Milo would jump on the remote, change the channel, and stare at me like he'd done me a favor. When a commercial for pet insurance came on, he froze, tilted his head, and smacked the screen with his paw. I swear he understood irony. I started keeping a notebook, writing down his performances. Act 1, knocks spoon into coffee mug. Act 2, climbs onto curtain rod. Act 3, stares into the mirror, hisses at his own reflection, then rolls over in defeat. By week's end, the cabin looked like a comedy club had exploded inside. Scratched furniture, missing socks, coffee stains on the wall, and one very proud bobcat sitting in the middle of it all. And yet, I couldn't stop smiling. Sometimes at night, I'd hear him padding softly across the floor, tail brushing against the wood. He'd jump onto the couch beside me and rest his head on my arm. For a few quiet minutes, it was just us, the fire crackling, the hum of the heater, and the steady rhythm of his breathing. Then, just when I thought peace had finally arrived, he'd let out a sudden sneeze that sent ash from the fireplace flying. "Thanks, partner," I'd mumble. "You sure know how to keep the air lively." The next morning, I woke to a crash that could have woken the whole valley. Milo had somehow gotten into the pantry. A bag of flour had exploded, and my little bobcat looked like a ghost, covered head to tail in white powder. He blinked through the dust, sneezed, and strutted past me as if he'd just finished a Broadway show. I grabbed my phone and took a picture. When I sent it to Linda, she texted back, "You're officially a cat dad." I laughed so hard my sides hurt. Later that week, Bill the mailman stopped by. "Morning, George. I got your mail and, your bobcat just stole my hat." I looked up to see Milo sitting proudly on the porch railing, Bill's blue cap dangling from his mouth. "He's collecting souvenirs now," I said. Bill shook his head and muttered something about wild animals and retirement. It wasn't all chaos. There were moments that felt healing. One afternoon, I dozed off in my chair. When I woke, Milo was asleep on my lap, purring softly. I sat there for a long time, afraid to move. The woman smelled like wood smoke and coffee. Outside, the wind howled across the pine trees, but inside, there was warmth. Life. A heartbeat next to mine. I realized then that laughter and comfort were starting to come back to this place, sneaking in quietly through fur and mischief. For years after Mary was gone, I'd prayed for peace. What I got instead was a reminder that peace doesn't always come quiet. It sometimes comes in with claws, a crooked smile, and a talent for knocking over water glasses. When the sun dipped behind the mountains, I looked over at Milo sitting by the window, his golden eyes watching the last bit of light disappear. He turned, gave me that look, half wild, half something else, and I swear I could hear Mary's voice in my head. "You needed this, George. You needed to laugh again." I poured myself another cup of coffee, leaned back, and smiled. "All right, you little comedian," I said softly. "What show are we running tomorrow?" Milo flicked his tail, yawned, and jumped onto the table, sending a stack of mail flying into the air like confetti. I laughed out loud. For once, it didn't feel like I was laughing alone. By the time spring thawed the snow off the pines, Milo and I had somehow become the talk of the valley. I never planned on that. Hell, I never planned on anything lately. But folks in town started calling us the Mountain Comedy Duo. I didn't know whether to laugh or apologize. Milo had grown bigger, leaner, and somehow even more confident. His spots had darkened, His shoulders widened, and yet he still thought he was a lap cat. Every morning, when I'd sit down with my first cup of coffee, he'd hop right onto me, nearly spilling it every time. "You're pushing 30 pounds, pal," I'd tell him. He'd blink, stretch, and make himself heavier just to prove a point. Our days fell into a strange rhythm. I'd chop wood outside while Milo stalked birds he'd never catch. When I mended fences, he'd follow, crouching like a miniature lion, ready to pounce on my gloves whenever I set them down. He wasn't just company anymore. He was a full-time supervisor. One afternoon, I was hauling groceries from the truck when Bill the mailman stopped by again. "George," he said, pulling his cap low, "your bobcat's been stealing my letters again." "Letters?" I asked, laughing. He held up a half-chewed envelope. "Found this in a tree stump near your fence. Looks like he's starting a savings account." Milo was sitting on the porch rail, tail flicking smugly. "I swear," he winked at Bill. "Guess he's handling my mail forwarding now," I said. Bill grumbled something about wild animals and retirement plans, but when he left, I caught him smiling. That night, I sat by the fire, flipping through a catalog Linda had dropped off for me, stuff like pet insurance, flea collars, and scratching posts. "Imagine that," I said aloud, "a bobcat with his own insurance policy." Milo, as if on cue, jumped up and pawed the page with the picture of a luxury cat bed. "You've got expensive taste, kid," I muttered. "I can barely afford heating oil." He didn't care. He started chewing the corner of the catalog until it looked like modern art. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me while I worked, eyes alert, tail flicking like he was taking notes. He'd mimic what I did, scratch at wood when I used a saw, paw at my boots when I put them on. It was like living with a furry apprentice who thought he ran the place. Linda stopped by one weekend with her niece, Sophie, a 10-year-old who'd never seen a wildcat up close. "Is he dangerous?" she asked, hiding halfway behind her aunt. "Only if you're made of roast chicken," I said. Milo sauntered over, sniffed her shoes, and plopped down, purring loud enough to shake the floorboards. Sophie's eyes lit up. "He's purring," Linda laughed. "See, George? He's good with kids. Maybe you should charge admission." I waved her off. "Nah, but maybe I'll start a YouTube channel, The Bobcat and the Old Man Show." Linda chuckled. "With your luck, it'd go viral." She wasn't wrong. A few days later, I set up my old phone and filmed Milo doing his daily routine. He'd hide behind the couch, leap at me, land on a cushion, and give that smug stare like he'd just told the best joke in town. I uploaded the clip before bed, thinking nothing of it. By morning, I had 20 missed calls and a text from Linda that said, "George, you're famous." I opened my laptop, half expecting a scam, but there it was, over 800,000 views overnight. The comments were endless. People from all over the country were writing things like, "I wish my grandpa had a bobcat," and "This made my whole day." For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. But fame, as it turns out, doesn't impress bobcats. Milo sat there licking his paw, completely uninterested in his online stardom. When I tried to film him again, he refused to cooperate, turning his back, yawning, or walking out of frame. A true artist, difficult and unpredictable. Still, the attention brought some funny moments. Tourists started driving by the cabin, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. One woman shouted from her car window, "Is that the funny bobcat from the internet?" I shouted back, "Only when he's in the mood." She laughed and drove off. No, Milo watched her leave, then stared up at me with what looked like judgment. "Don't worry, partner," I said. "You're still the same chaos I know and love." That evening, Bill dropped off a package. "Someone sent this for Milo," he said, handing me a box. Inside was a toy mouse and a note, "To the funniest cat in Montana." Milo batted the toy twice, then ignored it completely. He preferred my shoelaces. Life with him was messy, unpredictable, and somehow perfect. My friends from town stopped by more often now. Linda brought homemade soup, Bill brought gossip, and Sophie drew pictures of Milo with crayons. The cabin, once too quiet, now buzzed with voices and laughter. One night, after everyone had gone home, I sat outside with Milo beside me. The moonlight glowed across his fur, turning the spots into silver shadows. He stretched, yawned, and leaned against my leg. I scratched his ear gently. "You and me, kid," I whispered, "just two misfits keeping each other alive." He blinked slowly, the way cats do when they trust you. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't in years. My days didn't feel long anymore. I wasn't counting hours or winters, I was just living. As the firelight flickered behind the window, I thought about how strange it all was. A man looking for peace found laughter instead. A wild creature looking for shelter found a home. Maybe that's what healing really is. Not silence, not stillness, but the sound of something small, breathing beside you, while you sip your evening coffee and smile, without knowing why. When I went inside, Milo followed, brushing against my leg. He jumped up onto the couch, circled once, and flopped down with a satisfied grunt. I looked at him and said, "Good night, partner. Tomorrow we'll try not to break anything." He opened one eye, flicked his tail, and in that lazy way of his, answered back with a soft murp. Outside, the wind hummed low through the trees, and for the first time since Mary's passing, I realized I didn't dread the quiet anymore. Because this time, it wasn't empty. It was full of mischief, laughter, and one ridiculous bobcat who'd somehow become my best friend. The snow had finally melted off the porch, leaving behind muddy patches and the faint smell of pine. It was the first true spring day, the kind that makes the mountains look alive again. Milo was sprawled in the sunlight like a retired king, his belly rising and falling with every lazy breath. I sat beside him, cleaning out an old trunk I hadn't opened in years. The trunk was cedar, worn smooth at the edges. It had belonged to my wife, Mary. I wasn't sure why I'd chosen that day to open it. Maybe it was the smell of fresh air. Maybe it was because laughter had started to return to the cabin, and I finally had the courage. Milo watched curiously, tail flicking. When I lifted the lid, dust swirled like ghosts escaping after a long sleep. Inside were her letters, bundles of them tied with fading ribbons. Cards from Christmases long gone, ticket stubs from the county fair, even a little photo of us standing by a stray cat we'd found the year we got married. I held that photo in my hand for a long while. Mary had been laughing in it, her hair blown across her face, that cat sitting smugly between us. "You'd like her, Milo," I said softly. "She had your attitude." He looked up, blinked once, and pressed his paw against the edge of the trunk, as if giving permission to keep going. There was one envelope near the bottom, different from the rest. My name was written on it in her careful handwriting. The ink had faded, but the words were still strong, "For when you need to smile again." I hesitated. My throat tightened. Then I unfolded the paper. She'd written, "George, if you're reading this, I hope it's because you finally stopped being so stubborn. You were always the serious one. You fought fires, storms, and time itself, but you never learned how to let the world make you laugh. Promise me when you're ready, you'll let something wild back into your life." My hands shook. I read the line 3 times before setting it down. Milo must have sensed something because he climbed into my lap, 30 pounds of fur and heart, and nudged his head against my chin. That simple gesture broke me. I laughed through the tears. "Well, sweetheart," I whispered, "looks like you got your wish." Later that evening, I sat outside with a cup of coffee, staring at the sunset melting into the pines. The mountains looked softer than they had in years. Milo sat next to me, his fur catching the gold of the dying light. For the first time, I noticed how calm he'd become, less the wild, chaotic cub, more a steady presence beside me. Linda stopped by on her way home from the clinic. She saw the open trunk through the window and walked up quietly. "Going through the old memories?" she asked. I nodded, found one of her letters. She looked at me with that kind smile she had. "She'd be glad you opened it." I handed her the letter. She'd read it silently, then looked toward Milo. "You think maybe she sent him?" I smiled, feeling that lump rise in my throat again. If she did, she's got a hell of a sense of humor. Linda laughed softly. "You needed that, George. We all saw it. You were fading." "Yeah," I said, watching Milo chase a butterfly through the grass. "But somehow that little rascal brought the noise back." She rested a hand on my shoulder. "Keep him close. Life's better when it's a little messy." After she left, the cabin felt warm again. I tucked the letter back into its envelope and placed it by the photo of Mary on the mantel. The fire crackled quietly, and I could almost hear her humming in the background. Milo wandered in, carrying something in his mouth, a small pine cone, probably from the yard. He dropped it at my feet like an offering and sat down proudly. "You're bringing me gifts now?" I said. "You really are trying to train me." He blinked, tilted his head, and let out that half-chirp sound that always made me laugh. The next few days, I noticed I was humming again while making breakfast. I hadn't done that since Mary passed. There was something healing about the rhythm of normal life, coffee brewing, birds outside, the scrape of Milo's claws on the old floorboards. I found myself talking to him more, not because I expected an answer, but because the silence no longer felt so heavy. One morning I drove into town to pick up supplies. At the hardware store, Bill waved from across the lot. "Hey, Hollywood," he shouted, "your video's at 2 million views now." I chuckled. Guess folks can't get enough of a grumpy old man and his oversized house cat. "You should monetize it," he said. "He's your retirement plan." I laughed. "Nah, I think he's more like my therapist." Back at the cabin, I checked my email, something I hadn't done in months. There were messages from strangers across the country, people saying the video made them smile, that it reminded them of their own pets, or that they'd just lost someone and found comfort in seeing an old man laugh again. I sat there for a long time, reading every line. Maybe that was Mary's plan all along, to give me something wild enough to remind others they weren't alone either. That night, as rain pattered against the roof, I took the letter back down and read it again. The words didn't hurt anymore. They felt like a quiet kind of warmth. Milo was curled on the rug, sound asleep, paws twitching like he was dreaming of chasing the whole world. "Guess we're doing all right, huh, Mary?" I whispered. Outside, thunder rolled over the hills. Milo's ears twitched, and he lifted his head just enough to look at me before letting out a deep sigh. I smiled. "Don't worry, partner, I've fought worse storms." I poured myself another cup of coffee and added a spoonful of honey, Mary's favorite. The firelight danced across the walls, flickering over the picture frames and that open letter beside them. Maybe healing doesn't come in grand gestures. Maybe it sneaks in softly, through laughter, through the weight of a sleepy bobcat in your lap, through a letter waiting patiently for years until you're ready to open it. And sitting there in that golden light, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was finally living again. The following week started like any other. Quiet mornings, strong coffee, and a bobcat determined to test the limits of my patience and my furniture warranty. By then, Milo had fully grown into his name. He wasn't a kitten anymore. He was a full-sized wildcat with shoulders like a wrestler and a personality big enough to fill the whole valley. And yet every day he found a new way to make me laugh until my ribs hurt. It began one Sunday morning when I decided to fix a loose board on the porch. I stepped outside, toolbox in hand, and turned around to grab a nail from my pocket, only to find Milo standing proudly with my hammer in his mouth. "You're kidding me," I muttered. He blinked once and trotted off with it, tail high like a thief in broad daylight. I chased him around the cabin for 10 minutes before he dropped it in front of the stove, as if to say, "You forgot this, old man." That was his sense of humor. Chaos, but with timing so perfect you couldn't stay mad. Later that day, I set up my camera again. People online had started asking for updates about the laughing bobcat, so I figured I'd give them a show. I filmed Milo while I made breakfast, thinking he'd just sit quietly for once. But of course, he had other plans. The video started normal, me frying bacon, coffee steaming, Milo lounging near the counter. Then, just as I cracked an egg, he leapt onto the counter, stole a strip of bacon, and sprinted straight into the living room like a criminal mastermind. I ran after him, yelling, "You're on camera, you lunatic!" He turned, stared right into the lens, and burped. I didn't even try to stop laughing. When I posted the video, it exploded. 10 million views in 3 days. Local news stations called to ask if they could interview me. One reporter said, "You realize your bobcat might be the most famous animal in Montana?" I looked at Milo, who was sitting on the table, licking butter off his paw. "Yeah," I said. "He's handling fame just fine." Linda called that evening, laughing so hard she could barely speak. "George, do you realize you're a celebrity now? You could sell shirts or start a channel, teach seniors how to live with wildlife or how to survive it," I said. But truth be told, I didn't mind the attention. For the first time since Mary passed, people were calling not to offer condolences, but to laugh with me. That made all the difference. Of course, Milo wasn't content with just online fame. He had to take it to the next level. One afternoon, I was practicing piano, the old one Mary used to play when the nights got long. The keys were dusty and slightly out of tune, but the sound still felt like home. I started playing Blue Moon of Kentucky, slow and soft. Milo sat on the floor, staring at my hands. Then, without warning, he jumped up beside me and slammed his paw on the keys, producing the worst chord I'd ever heard. I laughed. "You got something to say, maestro?" He did it again, 2 more paws, 2 more random notes, and then looked up at me like, "Your turn." That became our new routine. Every evening we'd play together. I'd hit a few keys, he'd add his chaos, and somehow it worked. I uploaded one of those sessions, calling it the Bobcat Sonata. The video hit 5 million views overnight. People left thousands of comments, better than half the music on the radio. "This cat has rhythm," and one that nearly made me tear up. "Watching this with my dad in hospice. Thank you for making him laugh again." I read that one aloud, my voice catching. Milo looked at me from across the room and patted over, placing his paw on my arm. For all his wildness, he knew when to be still. That quiet moment said more than words ever could. After that, I started seeing my inbox fill with messages, people sharing stories about their pets, their grief, their laughter. Some even asked if I offered pet therapy or laughter coaching. I had to chuckle at that. "Guess I'm in the business of happiness now," I told Linda one morning when she came by to check Milo's health. "He's healing more than himself," she said softly, watching him roll on the rug. "You too, you know." I smiled. "Yeah, maybe we're both learning how to live again." Then came the moment that sealed his reputation as a true comedian. One evening, I invited Bill and a couple of friends over for dinner. I'd cooked chili, poured whiskey, and promised them the quietest night of their lives. They all laughed, knowing it was a lie. Halfway through dinner, Milo jumped onto the table, sniffed the chili, and, before anyone could stop him, dipped his paw in and flicked it. The spoon flew, the bowl tipped, and suddenly my guests were wearing my best recipe. Everyone froze. Then Bill burst out laughing so hard his chair tipped over. Linda nearly spit out her drink. "Milo!" I shouted, trying to sound angry, but my laughter betrayed me. He sat there, licking chili off his paw, completely unbothered. "George!" Bill gasped between laughs. "I think he's funnier than half the comedians on TV." I shook my head, wiping tears from my eyes. "Yeah, and he doesn't even charge for tickets." That night, after everyone left, I sat in the living room, the mess half cleaned, the air still smelling like chili and laughter. Milo climbed onto my lap, purring softly. "You know," I said quietly, "I used to hate noise after Mary died. But now, I think I need it." He stretched, pressing his head against my chest. "You're one hell of a comedian, kid," I whispered. The firelight flickered, shadows dancing across the walls like ghosts that had finally learned to laugh. I leaned back, the warmth wrapping around me like an old friend. Maybe that was the secret. Maybe life wasn't about finding peace after loss, but about finding something wild enough to make you laugh through it. Outside, the wind carried the soft sound of the pines swaying. Inside, my house echoed with quiet contentment. The steady hum of a wood stove, the weight of a bobcat in my lap, and the echo of laughter that, for the first time in years, didn't sound lonely. It started like any other Montana winter evening, quiet, cold, and deceptively peaceful. The wind had a low hum that crawled through the trees, whispering of the storm the radio said was coming. I had stocked up on firewood, canned soup, and enough coffee to survive an apocalypse. Milo, of course, was less concerned. He was sitting by the window, watching snowflakes fall like confetti from heaven. I'd just settled in for the night when the wind picked up. The cabin creaked the way old houses do when they remember every winter they've survived. Outside, the sky turned white, the kind of white that erases everything: roads, fence, even time. The local forecast warned of record-breaking snow, but I wasn't worried. I'd faced worse storms before, but that night was different. Milo paced near the door, ears twitching. I figured he was restless, maybe hearing animals moving out in the woods. "Settle down, partner," I said, tossing another log on the fire. He didn't listen. He never did. His golden eyes locked on the window like he saw something I couldn't. Then came the sound, a sharp crack from outside, like a branch snapping under weight. Milo froze. A second later, he bolted toward the back door. I shouted his name, but before I could stop him, he leapt onto the counter, nudged the latch with his paw, and disappeared into the storm. The door swung open, wind screaming through the room, snow blasting in sideways. "Milo!" I yelled, grabbing my coat. My heart raced the way it hadn't in years. I stepped outside, the cold biting so deep it felt alive. The snow was blinding, the flashlight beam swallowed whole by the storm. "Milo!" I called again, voice cracking in the wind. Nothing, only the howl of the blizzard answering back. For an hour, I searched the yard, the trees, every drift near the property line. My boots sank into the snow, and my breath came out in ragged gasps. Every few minutes, think I saw movement, a shadow, a shape, but it was always the wind playing tricks. By the second hour, I couldn't feel my fingers. I stumbled back toward the cabin, shouting until my voice went hoarse. I stood in the doorway, soaked and shaking, staring at the trail of tiny paw prints that vanished into the white. For the first time since Mary passed, the house felt empty again. I sat by the fire all night, every crackle sounding like a distant cry. My mind raced through every possibility: wolves, freezing, getting lost. I told myself he was smart, fast, a survivor. But deep down, I knew how cruel the Montana wilderness could be. By dawn, the storm had slowed, leaving behind silence and a world buried in snow. The trees bent under the weight, and the air was still. I grabbed my shovel and flashlight and stepped out again, each breath forming clouds that lingered like ghosts. I searched all morning. No prints, no sound, just snow, endless, heartless snow. Linda arrived around noon, her old pickup grinding up the frozen path. She jumped out, face pale from the cold. "George, I came as soon as I heard about the storm. Is he—" "Gone," I said quietly. "Ran off last night." She placed a hand over her mouth. "Oh, George." "I've looked everywhere," I said. "The creek, the fence line, even the ridge." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "He's tough. He'll find shelter." "Maybe," I said, "but I can't help thinking he's out there wondering why I let him go." Linda looked at me gently. "You didn't let him go. He's wild, remember? It's in his nature." I didn't answer. I just stared at the horizon where the forest met the gray sky. For the first time in years, I felt truly helpless. Not the kind of helpless you feel when you can't fix a leaky pipe, but the kind that sits in your chest and reminds you how small you really are. That night, I sat by the window, staring into the dark. The storm clouds had cleared, and the stars were sharp enough to hurt your eyes. I left a bowl of food by the door, just in case. Every creak made me hope it was him. Every shadow made me believe. Days passed, no sign. I barely slept. I'd catch myself glancing toward the piano, the rug, the chair he used to steal. Every empty space screaming louder than the blizzard ever did. Linda stopped by again on the third day. "You need to rest," she said. "I'll rest when he's home." She sighed. "George, you can't control everything. Sometimes the wild takes what it lent us." I nodded, but I couldn't accept it. I'd already lost one love to time. I wasn't ready to lose another to the snow. That night, I dreamed of Mary. She was standing by the porch, smiling, her hair dancing in the wind. She looked at me and said, "He's not gone, George. He's finding his way back." When I woke, I couldn't tell if it was just a dream or something more. By the fifth morning, the air had turned soft again. The world glistened under a pale sun, every tree coated in ice that sparkled like glass. I stepped outside, coffee steaming in my hands. And then I saw it, small prints by the fence line. Not deer, not fox. Paw prints. My heart leapt. I followed the trail down the hill across the frozen creek. The prints zigzagged, playful, familiar. Then they stopped near a fallen pine. I looked around, breath held. "Milo?" I called. No answer, just the sound of melting ice dripping from the branches. I turned to head back, and that's when I heard it. A faint chirp, low and broken, but real. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand. "Milo!" I shouted again. Then, through the curtain of trees, I saw him. He was thinner, his fur matted with snow, one paw limping, but his eyes were the same, bright, wild, unapologetic. He staggered toward me, slow at first, then faster. When he reached me, he pressed his head against my leg, letting out a deep, shaky purr. I dropped to my knees, hugging him tight, tears freezing on my cheeks. "God, you stupid cat," I whispered, voice cracking. "You scared me half to death." He purred louder, almost like laughter. We walked back together, step by step, the sun climbing higher behind us. When we reached the cabin, I wrapped him in an old blanket, set him by the fire, and sat beside him until my eyes blurred. The house didn't feel empty anymore. That night, as the fire popped and hissed, I poured 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one to sit beside his bowl. "You brought me back to life once," I said softly. "Guess it was my turn." He lifted his head, blinked slowly, and let out that familiar murr-grup. Outside, the snow melted under the moonlight, whispering its apology. Inside, laughter returned, quiet this time, but real. Maybe that's what love is, I thought. Not holding on, but finding your way back, through storms, through silence, through the wild. For the first few days after the storm, Milo barely moved. He slept near the stove, wrapped in that old plaid blanket Mary used to keep for chilly nights. I'd check on him every hour, listening to his breathing the way you listen for the wind before a fire. He was weak, ribs showing, paws scraped raw. But his spirit, Lord, that spirit never changed. Even half-starved, he still tried to bite the thermometer Linda stuck under his tongue. When she came by to check on him, her eyes softened. "He's lucky," she said, running a hand over his back. "Yeah," I muttered. "We both are." Linda smiled. "He'll make a full recovery, George. Just keep him warm and loved." Warm and loved, 2 things this house hadn't been in years, not since Mary's laughter filled it. Now that same laughter was starting to echo again, even if it came from a half-wild bobcat. By the end of the week, Milo was up on his feet again, exploring the cabin like he was inspecting his kingdom for storm damage. He knocked over a photo frame, pawed at the curtains, and finally jumped onto the piano bench. I groaned. "Not again, maestro." Sure enough, he stomped a few keys with his front paws, offbeat, chaotic, but still somehow musical. I started clapping just to humor him. And then he did something that broke me and healed me all at once. He let out that odd little chirp of his, the one that always sounded like laughter. I sat there, tears blurring my eyes, laughing so hard I could barely breathe. It wasn't the kind of laugh that comes easy. It was the kind that climbs up from a place deep inside, a place that's been dark too long. "You're something else, kid," I whispered. "You really are." That evening, I called Bill to tell him the good news. "He's back, huh?" he said, his voice cracking. "Well, I'll be damned. That cat's tougher than half the guys I served with." "He's home," I said. "That's all that matters." "Good," Bill replied, "because the whole town's been asking about him. You better post another video before we start a search party." I laughed. "Give me a few days. He's still recovering his sense of humor." But the truth was, Milo didn't need much recovery time. By the next morning, he was back to his old tricks, stealing socks, knocking coffee cups off the table, and stalking me around the cabin like I owed him rent. I recorded a few clips of his welcome back tour and uploaded them to the channel. The response was overwhelming. The video hit over 15 million views in a week. Comments poured in from everywhere, Florida, Texas, even overseas. People wrote things like, "I cried when he came back. What a beautiful bond." This old man and his bobcat restored my faith in humanity, and one that hit me straight in the heart. My wife passed last year, and this story gave me hope again. I read that one twice, maybe 3 times. Then I looked over at Milo, sprawled upside down on the couch like a fool, his belly in the air. "You hear that?" I said softly. "You're helping people, you crazy little comedian." He rolled onto his side, blinked, and yawned, his way of saying, "You're welcome." Later that week, the local news crew came up to do a follow-up interview. They filmed us on the porch, me in my flannel jacket, Milo perched beside me like a furry king. The reporter smiled. "George, what's it like living with a celebrity cat?" I chuckled. It's like living with a teenager who never cleans his room and always thinks he's right. Milo flicked his tail, unimpressed. The reporter laughed so hard she almost dropped her mic. The story aired on TV that weekend, titled "The Bobcat Who Brought Laughter Back." It didn't just go viral again, it went nationwide. Talk shows wanted interviews, animal magazines requested photos, and one insurance company even reached out asking to feature Milo in a pet safety campaign. I turned that one down. Fame was never the goal. But something about all this stirred something deep in me. For years, I'd lived like a ghost in my own life, working through grief one quiet morning at a time. Now strangers were telling me how our story helped them heal, laugh, and even reconnect with their own families. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me and a bobcat. It was about anyone who'd ever felt alone and suddenly found light again. That night, as the stars blinked above the pines, I sat outside with Milo by my side. The air was cool, crisp, alive. The world was quiet in a good way this time, not empty, but peaceful. I poured myself a small glass of whiskey, the kind Mary used to buy me every Christmas. "Here's to you," I said, raising the glass toward the sky. "You sent him, didn't you?" The fire cracked softly. Milo looked up, then turned his head toward the dark forest, ears twitching. For a second, I thought I saw something, a flicker of movement in the trees. Maybe just the wind, maybe something more. I smiled. "Don't worry, sweetheart," I whispered. "He made it home." Milo nudged my hand, and I scratched behind his ear. He purred, low and deep, the sound rolling through the night like a quiet engine. It was the sound of comfort, of survival, of laughter born from tears. When we went inside, he leapt onto the bed, curled into a ball, and looked at me expectantly. I lay down beside him, the lamp casting a warm glow across the room. "You saved me, you know," I said. "Twice now." He blinked slowly, then let out that same soft mrrr. Outside, the snow began to fall again, gentle this time. No blizzard, no fear. Just soft, steady flakes covering the world in peace. And for the first time in years, I fell asleep with a smile, the sound of his purring blending with the whisper of the wind, knowing that laughter, real, healing laughter, had finally come home to stay. Spring came early that year. The mountains glowed green again, and the river near my cabin thawed with a sound like soft applause. The air carried that mix of pine and promise, the smell that makes old men like me feel young again. And right there, in the middle of it all, sat Milo, my spotted fool of a bobcat, sunbathing on the porch as if he'd built the whole world himself. He wasn't the scared cub I'd found behind the gas station anymore. He'd grown into a full-bodied, healthy, mischievous companion with the ego of a Hollywood star and the heart of a loyal friend. Folks still stopped by just to meet him. Kids from the town would wave when they passed, calling, "Hi, Milo," like he was their favorite celebrity. Sometimes I'd sit in my old rocking chair watching them and think, maybe God really did send me a comedian. Our days had found a rhythm again, morning coffee, piano time. A walk along the ridge where Milo liked to chase shadows and pretend he was still wild. I'd talk to him like he understood every word, and in a way, maybe he did. Griefhegen had old once made my days heavy. Now, laughter made them light. One morning, as the sun broke through the mist, I got a letter from the Montana Wildlife Foundation. They wanted to honor me and Milo at a local event for promoting compassion toward wild animals. I chuckled, turning the paper over in my hand. "Guess we're official now," I said to him. He looked unimpressed, chewing on the corner of the envelope. Linda stopped by that afternoon with a small cake and her niece, Sophie. "Congratulations, you two," she said. You're making a difference." I shrugged. "We just make people laugh. That's the difference," she replied. Later that evening, when the others had gone, I stood by the piano with Milo beside me. The cabin glowed warm, the kind of light that feels like home. I played a few slow chords, Mary's song, the one she used to hum when the world got too heavy. Milo pressed against my leg, purring in rhythm. For a moment, I could almost feel her there again, like her laughter was woven into the sound. "Funny how life works," I whispered. "You ask for peace, and God sends you chaos that heals you instead." Milo chirped, as if agreeing. A few weeks later, the wildlife event came. The community center was packed. Families, kids, local reporters, even a few folks who'd driven hours just to see the famous Montana bobcat. I gave a short speech, my hands shaking a little. I didn't plan any of this, I told them. I just took in a creature who needed help. Turns out he helped me more than I helped him. If you ever find something wild, whether it's an animal or a piece of your own heart, don't be afraid to care for it. Laughter can save a man just as sure as love can. When I finished, the room was quiet for a second, then broke into applause. Milo yawned and promptly fell asleep on stage. Typical. After that, things slowed down again. No more reporters, no more cameras, just the steady hum of life returning to normal. It was better that way. I started writing a little blog about our days. Nothing fancy, just small stories about our misadventures. People still visited the YouTube channel, commenting things like, "Still watching this with my grandpa every night," or "This story makes me believe in kindness again." And then came the night that reminded me how fast time moves. I woke to the sound of thunder rolling across the valley. Rain hammered the roof, and lightning flashed against the trees. Milo, who usually loved watching storms, was curled beside my chair, asleep. I reached down, resting a hand on his back. He stirred slightly, but didn't open his eyes. His breathing was slow, deep, peaceful. "Sleep, buddy," I whispered. "You've earned it." By morning, the storm had passed. The world was quiet, fresh, new. But Milo didn't wake up. He was lying there by the stove, curled in that same blanket Mary had once wrapped around me when I came home cold from a fire. His face looked calm, content, like he'd just decided he'd had enough of this world's jokes and was off to make God laugh for a while. I sat beside him for a long time, the silence heavier than any storm. I thought about the first day I found him, tiny, trembling, full of fight. I thought about the laughter, the chaos, the mess, the healing. And I smiled through the tears. "Guess your last trick was sneaking off while I was asleep," I said softly. That afternoon, Linda helped me bury him under the big oak near the creek. The sun broke through the clouds just as I finished, warm and golden. I could have sworn I heard that little chirp of his carried on the breeze. Days passed, but the cabin didn't feel empty this time. His paw prints were still on the porch. His scratches still marked the piano bench. The laughter, the love, they stayed. I'd sit by the fire each night, feeling the warmth spread through my chest, and think, he's not gone. He just found a new stage. A month later, a small package arrived from the Wildlife Foundation. Inside was a bronze plaque that read, "In honor of Milo, the Bobcat comedian, who reminded us that joy is the wildest thing of all." I mounted it above the piano, right next to Mary's picture, two souls who'd taught me how to live again. That night, I played one last song, slow, gentle, full of gratitude. The fire crackled, the mountains breathed, and the wind outside sounded almost like laughter. Before turning in, I stepped onto the porch. The moon hung low, painting the valley in silver. "You're probably up there causing trouble already," I said quietly. Don't let the angels nap too long. The wind answered with a soft whisper through the pines. I smiled, heart full. Good night, partner. Then I turned off the light, knowing that the laughter we'd shared, the kind that heals, that softens, that saves, wasn't gone. It had simply moved higher, where the wild hearts go. If this story made you smile, or maybe even tear up a little, drop a simple 1 in the comments so I know you're here with me. Your small click keeps these wild-hearted stories alive. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and stay close. There are more tales of courage, laughter, and the bond between humans and the wild waiting just around the corner.